When I grow up,
I want to be a teacher.
I want to be a musician.
I want to be a firefighter. I'm going to be a doctor.
I want to be a pilot and fly around the world.
I want to be a farmer.
I want to be a fisherman, a veterinarian,
An engineer. I want to help people.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to this high-level event, Together to End Child Labour. I'm Shireen Tadros, head of Amnesty International's UN office, and it's really an honor to moderate this event today, co-organized by the Permanent Mission of Luxembourg to the UN, the European Union, the ILO and UNICEF. This event is timely not only because 2021 is the international year for the elimination of child labor, but also because the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic has become intertwined with protecting the rights of every child. While significant progress has been made in the fight against child labor in the past 2 decades, over 160 million children are currently in child labor, many of those in hazardous conditions. In the next hour and a half, we will hear from policymakers, diplomats, a Nobel laureate, and a former child laborer. The aim is for us to discuss best practices for the elimination of child labor, as well as recommit to ending the practice in all its forms by 2025, in line with target 8.7 of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. First, a couple of housekeeping. Firstly, this event is being recorded and live streamed on UN Web TV and YouTube. And second, you're all used to this one. I just ask all the panelists to please remain muted until it's their turn to speak. I now very happily pass the floor for opening remarks to His Excellency, Mr. Jean Asselborn, Minister of Foreign and European Affairs in Luxembourg.
Thank you, Madame Tadros. Madame la vice-secrétaire générale des Nations Unies, Madame la directrice générale de l'UNICEF, Monsieur le commissaire européen, cher Nico, là, Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, je suis très heureux de m'adresser à vous en ouverture de cet événement de haut niveau que le Luxembourg a l'honneur d'organiser avec l'Union européenne, l'Organisation internationale du travail et aussi avec l'UNICEF. Malgré la ratification universelle de la Convention de l'OIT sur les pires formes de travail des enfants, le rapport publié hier par l'OIT et par l'UNICEF nous apprend que, vous l'avez dit, Madame Tadros, 160 millions d'enfants dans le monde sont affectés par ce phénomène d'un autre siècle. Le travail des enfants touche ainsi un enfant sur 10 dans le monde. La moitié des enfants affectés sont astreints à des activités très dangereuses. Ces millions de filles et de garçons sont privés de leur enfance, leur droit à la scolarité, à la santé physique et mentale, à un environnement sûr et stable. Les conséquences de la pandémie de Covid-19 menacent de pousser des millions d'enfants supplémentaires sur le marché du travail, alors que les pertes d'emploi et la baisse de revenus frappent de nombreux ménages déjà très vulnérables. En cette année internationale de l'élimination du travail des enfants, nous devons réaffirmer et renforcer les engagements pris en vue d'atteindre la cible 8.7 du programme de développement durable à l'horizon 2030, c'est-à-dire mettre fin au travail des enfants sous toutes ses formes d'ici 2025. Les causes profondes du travail des enfants sont multiples, mais le dénominateur commun est toujours la pauvreté. Afin d'éliminer le travail des enfants, il importe donc d'atténuer les chocs économiques et de garantir un accès équitable aux services sociaux et de réduire les vulnérabilités et les discriminations aussi. Dans le cadre de la stratégie de coopération, le Luxembourg s'est fixé pour objectif principal l'éradication de l'extrême pauvreté. Parmi les actions entreprises dans ce sens, la coopération luxembourgeoise a notamment mis l'accent sur l'éducation et s'engage pour un accès à une éducation de qualité pour tous. Celle-ci doit être gratuite et obligatoire, afin que les parents et les enfants puissent voir l'école comme la meilleure alternative pour leur avenir et leur bien-être. Compte tenu de son engagement de longue durée dans ce domaine au niveau multilatéral, le Luxembourg a choisi de faire des droits des enfants l'une de ses 4 priorités dans le cadre de sa candidature au Conseil des droits de l'homme pour le mandat 22-24. Les enfants sont l'avenir de nos sociétés. Assurer leur sécurité, leur éducation et leur santé est non seulement un devoir, mais constitue aussi un gage de prospérité pour tous. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And now to His Excellency, Mr. Nicolas Schmidt, European Commissioner for Jobs and Social Rights.
Cher Jean, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to participate on behalf of the European Commission in this important event marking the International Year for the Elimination of the Child Labour. And I must say, I'm very proud and very pleased that this conference, that this event has been co-organized by Luxembourg, and the initiative of our foreign minister is certainly very important in that context, the EU, the ILO and UNICEF. Until recently, we considered that we were making slow but steady progress towards the elimination of child labor. The latest figures are, however, very worrying. Between 2016 and 2020, the global progress against child labor has stagnated. The new estimates indicate that there were 160 million children in child labor at the beginning of 2020. Almost half of those children worked in hazardous conditions that directly endangered their health, safety, and moral development. With the COVID-19 pandemic, our challenge has grown much greater. Schools were closed for a long time, and many children around the world have dropped out and started working. According to the latest estimates, the pandemic may have forced a further 8.9 million young boys and girls into work by the end of 2020. We therefore find ourselves at a crossroads. We risk seeing the reversal of a 20-year-long effort. This is alarming and unacceptable situation, which requires us to redouble our efforts to reach the 2025 target. This International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour therefore takes on new relevance, and our public policies need to be up to this challenge. The European Commission has kept the promises made earlier this year. In the recently adopted EU strategy on the rights of the child, we renewed our commitment to strengthen children's rights within the EU, but also beyond. Through the establishment of the European Child Guarantee, where the UNICEF has given us a very, very important contribution and assistance. We keep our promise to ensure effective and free of charge access of children in need to essential services within the EU with a view of tackling child poverty and social exclusion. We have also reviewed our trade policy. We are stepping up our efforts for an effective implementation of the ILO child labor conventions by our trade partners. And we are now working on another key pledge, to to review our decent work agenda and to further promote human rights due diligence in global supply chains. We cannot continue consuming products which are collected or assembled in disgraceful working conditions, and notably by children. I hope today will be the occasion to show that governments remain and have to remain committed to this crucial mission. As Mr. Satyarthi once said, when we speak of child labor, humanity itself is at stake. By putting the adequate efforts and sharing the right practices, and with the contribution of the civil society, we can ensure that all children have access to education and to safe living environment, thus building better future for the young generations all over the world. Thank you.
Many thanks for that. And now a short video message from His Excellency, Mr. Volkan Bozkır, President of the 75th General Assembly.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be part of the high-level event to mark the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour. The UN has declared 2021 the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour out of a sense of pressing urgency. 152 million children, or 7% children worldwide, go to work rather than school or play. Often, these children work in hazardous conditions, for little pay and long hours. They miss out on what we all should expect: the right to a quality education, good health, and a chance to develop to our fullest potential. The COVID-19 pandemic and its impacts, such as school closures, income loss, deepening poverty, and limited social services, have forced more children into work. Inequalities have increased between and within countries, as the pandemic has disproportionately impacted the already disadvantaged, including children. Girls are particularly at risk of being trafficked or pushed into forced marriage. They are also less likely to return to school at the end of the pandemic. We must ensure that this generation is not lost. We must support these children to find their way back to their classrooms where they belong. The negative impacts of child labor are felt by the whole society, not just the children themselves. They are our future. Their productivity matters to all of us. Limiting the children's potential limits society's potential. The international community has made it clear that child labor has no place in modern society. I'm encouraged by the concrete pledges to act from governments, civil society, and businesses in response to this international year. But still, too many children suffer under the burden of work. We have a guide forward in the Sustainable Development Goals, which calls for the end of all forms of child labor by 2025. That is a mere 4 years away. With 152 million children in the workforce, we have no time to waste, and there is no space for excuses. We know what it takes to end child labor. Universal quality education, social protection, and poverty alleviation are all core factors. By working through the multilateral system, and in particular the United Nations, we can address the core drivers of child labor. It is clear that this issue will not be overcome unless the international community works closely together. Let us use this international year to ensure that no child is left behind. Thank you.
Now it's a pleasure to introduce the UN Deputy Secretary General, Her Excellency, Ms. Amina Mohammed.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, colleagues, let me say children as well that should be a part of this. Friends, Kailash, who has been working his life to bring children out of the darkness, our distinguished delegates. This high-level event falls on the eve of the World Day Against Child Labour. In prior years, this observance often brought encouraging news. From 2000 to 2016, member states reduced child labour by almost 100 million children, from 246 to 152 million. Today, instead, we reflect on a different reality. The new global estimates published by ILO and UNICEF indicate 160 million children in child labour, the first increase since we started counting. Half of these children are in hazardous work and puts their safety, of course, health, and sometimes even their lives at risk. Many suffer from violence when they work in the fields, in mines, in private homes, or in formal manufacturing. And children who are in forced labour, trafficked, or recruited for armed conflict are particularly at risk of violent treatment. COVID-19 threatens to push another 9 million into child labour by the end of 2022 due to the expected increases in poverty. Children aged 5 to 11 account for more than half of the predicted rise. Their education is compromised by school closures and inequalities in access to digital learning platforms. Bridging the digital divide is an urgent priority. Internet access and ICT equipment must be available to all children. The trajectory these trends will take depends on the policy choices and the responses that we make today. The 2030 Agenda and the Decade of Action offer an opportunity to make long-term gains for children left behind, including those in street situations who face multiple deprivations. The elimination of child labour requires multi-sectoral responses that include the private sector and local governments. Market conditions in rural economies are a crucial driver of low family incomes and child labour. And to make progress in numbers, this is where we need to start. COVID-19 stimulus packages must prioritise children's protection, with social protection floors providing a cushion against financial and health shocks. This can make the difference between families keeping their children in school or sending them to work. Meanwhile, responsible business conduct can help support children and families and ensure that child labour incidents are reported to child protection and labour inspectorate systems. Discrimination is another important factor. It is no coincidence that the rate of child labour is exceptionally high amongst Indigenous and migrant children. In conflict and humanitarian settings, investments in community-based reintegration programs are required to break the cycle of violence and prevent the recruitment of children into armed conflict. Excuse me. This includes support to family tracing, alternative care, education, vocational training, mental health, and psychosocial support packages. The optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the Involvement of Children in Armed Conflict and the ILO Convention on the Worst Forms of Child Labour provide legal frameworks to prevent violations. While the ILO Convention enjoys universal ratification, I would encourage that all member states to ratify the optional protocol without further delay. During this International Year of the Elimination of Child Labour, we have the opportunity to scale up our efforts and investments towards the achievement of the SDGs target 8.7. As we look to the 5th Global Conference next year in South Africa, let us press forward with greater coordination, commitments, and action to protect every child. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for that strong commitment and also the very strong call to action in your message. And now a recorded message from Mr. Guy Ryder, the Director General of the ILO.
Excellencies, it is my pleasure to address this high-level event to mark the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour. The ILO is honoured to join forces with UNICEF, the European Union and Luxembourg in convening this event to take forward this crucial global cause. Between the years 2000 and 2016, the world made significant progress, thanks to the collective action of governments, trade unions, business and civil society. Almost 100 million children were removed from child labour during this period. And we have acquired better tools to move forward faster. In August 2020, ILO Convention number 182 on the worst forms of child labour was universally ratified by all 187 ILO member states, an unprecedented historic milestone. But we are still a long way from reaching our goal, respecting the right of all children to a childhood. The reality is that millions of children are still in child labour. Worse still, our latest estimates published this week show an increase in child labour for the first time in 20 years, an extra 8.4 million child labourers since 2016. Those children who are still in child labour are spending much of their time working, often in occupations and conditions that are harmful to their healthy development, conditions that may even threaten their lives. Our latest report warns that millions more are at additional risk due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has plunged many millions into working poverty and informality. One thing we do know is that the crisis has forced children back into work and out of education, because with schools closing at the height of the pandemic, many families turned to their children to make up for lost income. There is no justification for child labour in the 21st century. It constitutes a violation of the rights of children, the right to play, the right to go to school, the right to health, the right to have a protected childhood, as established in ILO Conventions number 138 and 182, and of course in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. We cannot remain complacent or inactive, not about human rights violations that are due to discrimination, economic and social exclusion. There is much that can be done. We have the resources, we have the policies, and we have the experience to do it, and everybody must be involved. Governments should extend their social protection systems and provide a social protection floor for all. They should prioritize universal access to public education. They should also develop cash transfer programs, skills development, and entrepreneurial training in coordination with workers and employers. Companies should broaden collective bargaining and provide decent work to parents so that they don't need to resort to child labour to generate family income. And trade unions should develop initiatives that go beyond the formal sector, reaching out to more workers in the informal economy. And that is particularly relevant in the agricultural sector, where 70% of child labour is occurring, mostly in the family context. And for measures to be really effective, we must coordinate all of our efforts at the international level. The International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour is the perfect opportunity to share experiences amongst those countries that are struggling against child labour and those that have developed good practices that are working. The 5th Global Conference on Child Labour, to be held in South Africa in 2022, will then be the moment to align and to redouble our efforts towards the achievement of SDG Target 8.7, to eliminate all forms of child labour by 2025. We must go beyond words, we must translate commitments into concrete measures and realistic objectives. After all the suffering caused by the pandemic, making child labour history is a crucial part of building back better.
And now we'll hear from Ms. Henrietta Fore, the Executive Director of UNICEF.
Thank you very much, Shireen. Excellencies, colleagues, so many children and young people, ladies and gentlemen of every age. On behalf of everyone at UNICEF, thank you to the permanent missions of the EU and Luxembourg to the United Nations and our co-organizers at the ILO for helping us to shine a spotlight on this very important issue and mark the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour. So let me build on the remarks that have gone before me. The global estimates that we have jointly released with the ILO yesterday outline some alarming trends. Unless we reverse these trends, we will fall short of our target to eliminate child labour in all its forms by 2025. Even before COVID-19 struck, we were already off track. We have seen the first increase in child labor in 2 decades, 8.4 million more children engaged in this practice, bringing the total number of children in child labor to 160 million, almost 1 in 10 children worldwide. We are also seeing a very worrying increase in the number of younger children involved. Nearly 28% of children aged 5 to 11 and 35% between the ages of 12 and 14 are in child labor and are out of school. These young children are at a much greater risk of threats to their physical and their psychosocial health compared to other children. And for those children who are both working and going to school, the picture is also bleak. They're likely to lag behind their non-working peers in school performance and are more likely to drop out, limiting their prospects and their earnings in the future. COVID-19 has made this situation far worse. Job losses and economic woes mean that many families are facing enormous pressure to send their children to work instead of to school. School closures only add to this challenge. At the same time, too few families can access social protections to help keep their children learning and out of the workforce. We need to turn this around and to do so urgently, so families and children do not fall further behind, and we can move closer to our goal of eliminating all forms of child labor by 2025. So let me refer to the remarks of the Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed and the speakers who have gone before me. As countries look to the lasting economic recovery, we need to ensure that any recovery, reconstruction, or resilience efforts include targeted action to eliminate all forms of child labor. First, UNICEF calls for governments to expand investment into income support measures like cash transfers and child benefits to help make ends meet. And we need their help to promote decent work for adults, including fair wages, which can help families avoid poverty-driven child labor. Second, we also need governments to prioritize investments in education systems and in distance learning, with reopened schools and scaled up remedial learning pathways so children leaving the workforce can make up for lost learning. Third, governments must strengthen child protection systems, including with renewed investments in social workers. These systems are critical to ensuring that vulnerable children and families can access social services and protection from exploitation. Fourth, we need to recognize the many contributions that the global business community can make. We urge them to work with us to identify and eliminate child labor of every link of their local and global supply chains. For example, UNICEF and ILO are working with businesses in Ghana's cocoa growing regions. Together, we've developed a framework for action and a costing analysis, and are working with government and businesses alike to address the root causes of child labor in these regions. We urge public and private actors to join forces to develop stronger legal and regulatory frameworks that can help encourage and enforce responsible business practices. The European Union's human rights due diligence legislation is a good example of that kind of approach and what is needed. And fifth, we need the global community to help us fill the financing gap for this work with increased development assistance targeting child labor and economic recovery for families. This should also include support for debt relief, extension, and restructuring, so governments can focus their limited budgets on supporting people and investing in children, the best investment in the world. In this International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor, we need to act with renewed urgency to support the sustainable post-COVID recovery. So in conclusion, UNICEF believes that this recovery can and must include a renewed commitment to end child labor once and for all. We look forward to working with all of our partners to make this a reality. Thank you. Back to you, Shireen.
Thank you, Ms. Four, and thank you for that very strong intervention. Almost 1 in 10 children are in child labor. These are truly shocking statistics. For the final speaker in our opening segment, I'd like to invite Mr. Kailash Satyarthi, Nobel Peace Laureate.
My dear children of the world, Your Excellencies, sisters and brothers, needless to say that we were all encouraged when the number of child laborers were declining in the world. And European countries have played very important role in this achievement. But now, when we see the new figures, new data, it's worrisome, as was told before. When we learn that 8 million more children have been pushed into child labor, at the same time, world has become $10 trillion richer during those 4 pre-pandemic years. What would we say? We have also seen that Sub-Sahara Africa alone accounts for more child laborers than the rest of the world combined. I don't find any justification. I think we must confess to our children that we could not protect you, dear children, from the age-old discrimination and the inequality which is growing, and the inequality which is inexcusable and immoral. I remember a group of children working in cocoa fields in Ivory Coast and Ghana. And they told me they have never heard of chocolate, they have never tasted chocolate. I met young boys and girls in the fields in Brazil who were working in plugging oranges, but they were never allowed to eat one. A girl in Pakistan who was stitching footballs, but can never dream to play with a proper football. The children working in India in toys factories, but they were beaten up if they try to play with that assembled toy in the factory. And let me tell you, dear friends, that they all had injured bodies and shattered dreams. And none of them was working for local consumptions. These children were working for European and American companies in the supply chain. Child labor is not allowed in Europe. European companies cannot hire children. But how they can get impunity to employ children in their supply chain like this? I'm thankful to some European countries as well as the European Commission and Union, and now European Parliament, that a law for due diligence in supply chain is pending before you. I urge with a sense of urgency that a strong law must be passed. Another important issue after this pandemic, as has been explained by many speakers, that our children are in danger. And therefore, we need much more bolder steps. Again, I would like to refer to the discussion, ongoing discussion in some of the European countries and European Union about the possibility of a new, well-resourced global social protection fund. There is a need of establishing such a global social protection fund with a strong component for the fair share of children, especially marginalized children of the world. We have seen in many countries, wherever the social protection floats were active, Bolsa Escola, Bolsa Familia in Brazil, midday meal programs in India, employment guarantee schemes in India, food for education in several countries, have been extraordinarily successful in certain places. So This is the time to emphasize more on the social protection within the countries as well as at global level. Dear friends, I would call upon you for a minute to think as a grandmother and a grandfather, a father or mother, a sister or brother. If you are progressing every day in your life, would you afford or would you allow to leave your children behind? No progress will matter if you leave your children behind. They are all our children. Please, please don't leave them behind when we are making progress in all spheres of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Satyarthi, for that emotional appeal. And thank you so much to all our distinguished speakers for your passionate words and for your commitment. Next, we'll be speaking to a youth activist about all of these issues. But first, we have a short excerpt of a video from an event that the co-organizers held last week, featuring a presentation by humanitarian photographer Lisa Christine, who has spent the last 3 decades documenting social issues, including child labor, in over 150 countries. In the video, Christine discusses her experience documenting child labor in the stone sector.
In the Himalayas, I witnessed young people carrying stone that actually weighs more than their body weight. Now you can imagine there's several kids, sometimes adults, that hoist these stones up on the kids' backs, and they're sort of hoisted by these sticks and ropes that drop down from the crown of their head. Here we can see these 2 brothers that are actually wearing clothing for school, and yet, of course, they're not in school. They're extremely dirty, and they are holding hands in order to balance each other as they go down the treacherous path of the Himalayan range to trucks below. And of course, when I think of child labor and forced labor in general, I think about how we all participate knowingly, but mostly unknowingly, by what we buy, right? By what we consume. And when I see this stone, I think, oh, is that the stone like I have in my bathroom or my kitchen? The stone is incredibly heavy. The children develop neck issues and back issues at a young age. Little girls as well that are forced to endure. And you can just see the weight of both physical weight, but also emotional weight on these kids.
It was a very strong presentation. And in a moment, we'll have the opportunity to hear directly from ministers of state about their efforts to meet target 8.7. But first, it is a huge honor for me to introduce our next speaker, someone who's been a true inspiration to me personally because of her tireless effort to eradicate child labor, an effort that was born out of a lot of pain and suffering that she endured herself as a child laborer working on a tea plantation in Uganda. Molly Namirembe, welcome. I want to start by asking you to tell us about your experiences, what your day looked like back then and how you found yourself in this situation to begin with. Molly.
Greetings to you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure. Can you hear me now? Pleasure to be here with all of you to share my experience. Thank you for the question, how I got into child labor. My father died before I was 2 years old, and my paternal family wanted to take custody of me. So my mother had to secretly run away with me to take me to a distant place. So growing up, it was always my mom, my sister, and I. Unfortunately, at 11 years, on the 1st of March, 2004, my mother passed on, and we buried her. People were somehow there for us on that day, and eventually everyone left. So it was just the 2 of us, me and my sister. The only thing we knew how to do, because we lived near a tea plantation, was to pluck tea. And yeah, we got into the job. I did that part-time for a while until I completed my primary 7. But before I had to join a new school for secondary level, I needed a lot of money, which we did not have. So I thought that dropping out of school to work full-time was an option for me to collect more money. So that's exactly what I did. But unfortunately, even this didn't help because all the money we would collect would use to take care of our other utilities, buy food, and take care of ourselves. So it still didn't help. My day, I used to wake up very early in the morning. The latest would always be 6 a.m. I watched other children walk to school that early in the morning as I walked to a tea farm to work. We had to endure the morning dew, the coldness, working in pesticides, working for long hours, mostly with a basket around our necks and our chests so that we pluck and put the coffee, and that would happen for a whole day. At times we would stay hungry for the whole day as we worked. The days of my life. But the greatest pain was always seeing other children walk to school dressed in their uniforms as I was dressed in rags to go to a tea plantation. When I stayed there, I never lost hope. So I had one of my friends that would walk by to go to school. And every day in the evening, after I had finished to work and maybe prepared a meal for ourselves, I borrowed books to read, to copy notes and keep track. But after some time, I woke up and realized it was not working for me. I knew this was the time for me to stop throwing pity parties, but to wake up and take an action. I didn't know where to go, but I figured my mother had a best friend, so I looked out for her. And I told her whatever we were going through. She listened to me, and she helped me to trace my mother's family, and later we were able to trace my father's family, where one of my uncles then took me up into their wings, and I was able to go back to school. And the one thing I know is that it was painful, and it still gets me emotional even after all these years. And I want to tell you the scars of child labor never go away. Every time you have that thought and remember there are so many, over 150 million people still going through the same, it still breaks my heart. But I just know together we can be able to support those children to make a change in their lives and to make sure they never go through this. Yeah, thank you.
Sure, Molly, thank you. And you know, every time I've heard you speak, it has just been astounding, your strength and how you have turned that pain into working and a real mission. And I'm so sorry to make you have to, you know, talk again about this very painful period in your life. So maybe I'll move it forward and talk about your mission right now and how you are trying to tackle child labor through your own projects, through education, the arts, the media. Tell us a little bit about that work and the SCREAM project that you're involved with now.
SCREAM is support children's rights through education, the art and media. It is a methodology of the International Labour Organization that I interacted with in the final year while I was at the university. It's a methodology that empowers children in child labor to be able to speak out, to ask for help from duty bearers, as well as any other people around them that can be able to support. And we do this in the most comfortable way for children to express themselves. That's why we use art through drawing, through pictures, through cartoons, through music, through drama, and through poems. It encourages the children to understand the value of education and the value of helping one another, reaching out to themselves, but also being a voice to others. Excuse me, just a minute. I'm sorry about that. The SCREAM methodology also prepares children for interventions, because I can tell you that removing children from child labor and taking them to school or taking them for skilling right away, sometimes it's hard to cope. I personally took about more than 2 years, and I'm not even sure I have already coped because the emotions keep coming back and the feelings keep coming back. But so it takes effort to help these children to be able to cope. So when I interacted with this methodology, it kind of resonated with my innermost passion, because I knew that we needed a generation of resilient people, a generation of children who know the value of education, a generation of children who are not ready to give up on education no matter what, a generation of other young children who are not able to access school in a certain period of time, but can be able to keep track. And that's why I was able to take it up, and I still use it to help other children to go through, to come out of child labor.
Thanks.
I know we have a target of ending child labor in all its forms by 2025, but with the impact of COVID-19, with the schools being closed and yet farms, lakes, quarries, mining sites remain open, I think we are far away from the reality, and we need to accelerate our efforts. This is also evident in the statistics that all the previous speakers have mentioned. I looked at them yesterday, and they're indeed worrying and heartbreaking. We have done a lot with this SCREAM methodology, but one thing that I'm so proud of is that in my work since 2016, I've been able to work with 13 child clubs all over the country, Uganda, with many of them in the northern part of Uganda in Karamoja. Some of the milestones that we've been able to reach as the SCREAM clubs, we have advocated for 2 ordinances that are against child labor, with one of them in a border district.
Sorry about these technical problems.
In Busia, with another in Karamoja, and for agriculture, a lot of commercial. Hello?
And go ahead.
Okay, so we have worked together with those 13 clubs to advocate for ordinances, which we have achieved in Bujiri, in Busia, at the border, and in some parts of Karamoja. We have also we were consulted, our SCREAM clubs were consulted in 2019 in the review of Uganda's Mining and Minerals Bill of 2019, because child labor was becoming a problem. And I want to report that for the first time, this bill has sections that talk about child labor as one of the issues that can cause revoking of a mining license in Uganda. And we intend to do more for many of the policies that are up for review in Uganda. We know now that there is a review of the oil and gas policy of 2008. And we are already looking at ways how we can be able to take part as children, as my clubs that we have all over the country. And I'm sure we shall be able to make sure that there's a line on child labor and how mining companies can be able to support. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Molly, for your hard work and for sharing your story with us today. It really has made such a huge difference to hear from you. So thanks so much. And I'm so glad that technology just about kept up with us as well. Next up, we are going to hear from His Excellency, the Honorable Nimal Srilapala de Silva, Minister of Labour in Sri Lanka. Your Excellency, thanks for your support and presence today. Perhaps you can tell us about the current situation in Sri Lanka with child labour.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a great pleasure and privilege to participate in the high-level event on behalf of Sri Lanka. My participation today signifies the strong commitment of the government of Sri Lanka towards elimination of child labor. It is a commitment that I advance and promote with passion, since we strive to see a child labor-free Sri Lanka. Child labor situation in Sri Lanka has continued to decrease for the past few decades. The statistics of 2016 Child Activity Survey indicates that only 43,714, which is less than 1% of the total child population, has been observed to be engaged exclusively in economic activities and considered as child labor. However, the unprecedented economic impact of COVID-19, together with school closure, might fuel child labor. We should not allow our decades of work to go in vain. Making the right child protection and socio-economic policy choices will safeguard families and their children during the immediate crisis. Our country has been working more intensively on child labor amid pandemic, and we are on the track towards the targets. This January, we have increased minimum age of admission to employment from 14 to 16 in line with our educational policies. We have finalized hazardous list by including various new fields of hazardous lists such as domestic work. Once this is approved by Parliament, young person will be protected against working in 71 fields of work which are considered dangerous to child health. This is also seen as one of the milestones in our journey towards the elimination of child labor. In addition to the legal framework, it is important to address the full range of issues that children face, and it requires the implementation of measures that can contribute to elimination of the child labor and address its root causes. May I state, one of the root causes is the poverty. Therefore, poverty alleviation program is very necessary in order to address this issue to great extent. In this context, we have taken steps to strengthen at district and divisional level mechanism to identify vulnerable families where child labor could emerge. We have prepared a 5-year integrated action plan with other state agencies to address root causes of child labor. Further, we have signed a memorandum of understanding with the Sri Lanka Girl Guides Association, which is the national organization of Sri Lanka, with the objective of creating awareness among students and raise awareness among parents. Further, Sri Lanka will continue to work towards achieving zero tolerance to child labor occurrences. In accordance with the commitment made to the world as a pathfinder country of 8.7 Alliance, we are happy to share our experience in child labor with other countries. I take this opportunity to thank ILO, UNICEF, European Union, and Luxembourg for organizing this timely high-level forum. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now turn to His Excellency, Mr. Adama Kamara, Minister of Employment and Social Protection in Côte d'Ivoire, where trafficking and corruption have been serious challenges for the government. Your Excellency, welcome.
Je vous remercie. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, c'est avec un réel plaisir que je prends part à cet événement mondial de haut niveau sur le thème « Ensemble pour mettre fin au travail des enfants », marquant l'année internationale pour l'abolition du travail des enfants, et j'en remercie les initiateurs. Je vais m'employer dans le temps qui m'est imparti de vous dresser l'état des lieux de la lutte contre la traite, l'exploitation et le travail des enfants en Côte d'Ivoire et vous indiquer nos perspectives d'action pour accroître l'impact de nos interventions en vue de l'atteinte de l'article 8.7 des ODD. En effet, depuis plus de 2 décennies, la Côte d'Ivoire est confrontée à la problématique de la traite et du travail des enfants. Les enquêtes nationales montrent que ce phénomène s'observe surtout dans l'économie informelle et notamment dans les secteurs de l'agriculture, des services et des mines et carrières. Face à cette situation, le gouvernement de la République de Côte d'Ivoire a entrepris des actions visant à l'éradication de ce fléau. À partir de 2011, l'action gouvernementale va connaître un dynamisme grâce à la volonté politique de son Excellence, Monsieur le Président de la République, Alassane Ouattara, qui a pris de vigoureuses mesures pour s'attaquer aux causes profondes du phénomène. Cela s'est traduit par la mise en place du Comité national de surveillance des actions de lutte contre la traite, l'exploitation et le travail des enfants, CNS, présidé par Madame la Première Dame Dominique Ouattara, et le comité interministériel de lutte contre la traite, l'exploitation et le travail des enfants, baptisé le CIM, que j'ai l'honneur de présider. Ces deux comités, en collaboration avec les parties prenantes, ont élaboré et mis en œuvre 3 plans d'action nationaux de 2012 à 2021. Les 2 premiers étaient budgétisés à hauteur de 13 milliards de francs CFA, soit environ 24 millions de dollars US chacun, et le 3e à hauteur de 76 milliards de francs CFA, soit environ 140 millions de dollars US, ce qui correspond à une augmentation de 83% par rapport au budget précédent. Cet effort au niveau du financement des actions de lutte contre le travail des enfants traduit clairement la volonté de la Côte d'Ivoire d'intensifier ses efforts en la matière. Notre stratégie de lutte contre le travail des enfants s'articule autour de 4 principaux piliers qui sont la prévention du phénomène, la protection des victimes, la poursuite et la répression des auteurs, et enfin, le renforcement des mécanismes de coordination et de suivi-évaluation. Elle s'opérationnalise à travers des politiques, des programmes et des projets visant l'accès des enfants aux infrastructures sociales de protection et à une scolarisation gratuite et de qualité, et l'amélioration de la qualité et des conditions de vie des populations, la promotion du travail décent, la protection sociale et le développement rural. Tous ces efforts ont produit des résultats satisfaisants. Cependant, nous ne sommes pas encore parvenus à l'éradication totale du phénomène. Nous devons donc poursuivre nos efforts inlassablement. C'est dans cette perspective que la Côte d'Ivoire s'est engagée comme pays pionnier de l'Alliance 8.2 en 8.7 en 2019 pour traduire sa volonté à aller plus loin et plus rapidement vers l'éradication du travail des enfants. Face à ce défi, il me paraît fondamental de renforcer nos efforts conjoints dans un cadre inclusif et coordonné, afin de mener des programmes capables d'opérer des transformations structurelles du secteur de l'économie informelle et du monde rural. Il nous faudra encore une importance à l'échelle, il nous faudra encore accorder une importance à la recherche scientifique visant à développer des outils, des technologies et des mécanismes innovants de production qui réduisent la pénibilité et la dangerosité des travaux et garantissent la santé et la sécurité au travail. Il faudrait également soutenir l'accès des communautés rurales aux prestations de protection sociale, notamment la couverture maladie universelle, le régime social des travailleurs indépendants, qui constitue un des éléments clés de la lutte contre la précarité et la pauvreté. Voici, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, le point de situation, la vision et les perspectives de la Côte d'Ivoire en matière de lutte contre la traite et le travail des enfants. Je vous remercie de votre aimable attention.
Many thanks, Minister, and apologies to everyone. The English translation is having some glitches, but in the meantime, as we fix it, hopefully you can all practice your French as I'm doing. I'd now like to introduce His Excellency, Mr. Fernando Arab, Vice Minister of Labour in Chile. Your Excellency, tell us how your government is taking up the challenge of meeting target 8.7.
Bueno, muy buenos días, autoridades de la OIT, de la UNICEF, de los Estados miembros, señoras y señores. Cuando Chile asumió como país pionero de la Alianza 8.7 a finales del año 2018, luego de la generosa invitación que nos realizara el director general de OIT, don Guy Ryder, lo entendimos no solo como un reconocimiento a la labor realizada, sino que principalmente como un tremendo desafío. Este desafío tiene por objeto avanzar en temáticas relacionadas a la erradicación del trabajo infantil, la trata de personas y el trabajo forzoso, materias que en Chile son abordadas por diferentes instituciones, lo que constituye sin duda un reto en términos de coordinación intersectorial. Así, por ejemplo, las materias de trabajo infantil y trabajo forzoso son llevadas a cabo por el Ministerio del Trabajo y Previsión Social. En cambio, las materias relativas a la trata de personas son desarrolladas por el Ministerio del Interior y Seguridad Pública. En lo que respecta a la erradicación del trabajo infantil, nos hemos focalizado en fortalecer las acciones de capacitación que permitan generar un cuerpo profesional competente para, en primer lugar, identificar cuándo existe trabajo infantil, para luego poder activar las alertas y redes que nos permitan abordar los casos detectados, prevenir futuros casos y así, en definitiva, erradicar el trabajo infantil de nuestro país. Esta meta es ambiciosa, pero resulta posible si todos los actores involucrados cumplen con su labor. En Chile, estos planes de acción incorporan a las policías, a las oficinas especializadas en temas de niñez, a los municipios, a los empleadores, a las comunidades educativas y, por supuesto, a los trabajadores, entre otros actores relevantes en materia de protección de la niñez y la adolescencia. Adicional a lo anterior, durante el año 2020, logramos aprobar, promulgar y publicar la Ley 21.271, que adecúa nuestro Código del Trabajo en materia de protección de niños, niñas y adolescentes en el mundo laboral. Esta ley constituye un importante avance de nuestra legislación nacional para fortalecer las normas relativas a la prevención y erradicación del trabajo infantil, así como para otorgar mayores garantías y resguardos al trabajo del adolescente protegido. De esta manera, Chile hoy dispone de una normativa que cumple plenamente con los estándares internacionales y que nos permite dar fiel cumplimiento al compromiso que adquirimos como país pionero ante la OIT, organización que, hay que decirlo, tuvo un rol fundamental en la tramitación legislativa de esta ley, al realizar importantes aportes, lo que valoramos y agradecemos. Respecto de esta nueva ley, es importante destacar algunos aspectos. En primer lugar, se mantiene la prohibición de trabajar a todo menor de 15 años de edad. Se permite excepcionalmente que adolescentes con edad para trabajar, es decir, entre 15 y 17 años de edad, puedan hacerlo bajo determinadas condiciones y requisitos bastante estrictos. Debe existir siempre una compatibilidad entre la jornada escolar con la jornada de trabajo del adolescente con edad para trabajar. Además, no puede desarrollar nunca trabajo considerado como trabajo peligroso. Y por último, la ley fortalece y aumenta las multas asociadas al trabajo infantil, a las actividades catalogadas como peligrosas y al incumplimiento de los requisitos para la contratación de adolescentes. Finalmente, se crea además un registro especial de aquellos empleadores infractores en esta materia. Esta nueva normativa nos obligó también a tener un reglamento actualizado con un listado claro de aquellas actividades consideradas como peligrosas, reglamento en el cual intervino no solo las instituciones ligadas al mundo laboral, sino que también aquellas instituciones ligadas al mundo de la salud y encargadas también de los temas de niñez, entregando con esto una mirada mucho más integral a esta materia. Asimismo, durante este año internacional para la eliminación del trabajo infantil, como Ministerio del Trabajo y Previsión Social, hemos priorizado 3 áreas específicas. En primer lugar, trabajo infantil y población migrante, comprendiendo que esta población se ha visto mayormente vulnerable por la pandemia del COVID-19, para lo cual, en alianza con la OIT y con la OIM, hemos realizado diversos seminarios y esperamos en el segundo semestre de este año 2021 lanzar un curso sobre la materia. En segundo lugar, trabajo adolescente protegido en el marco de esta nueva ley que ya hemos hecho referencia. Y en tercer lugar, trabajo infantil y enfoque de género, respecto de lo cual es importante tener presente que el trabajo al interior del hogar que realizan principalmente niñas y adolescentes es un tema generalmente invisibilizado y que en el contexto de la pandemia se ha incrementado fuertemente, por lo que resulta fundamental que nos hagamos cargo. Finalmente, en cuanto al trabajo forzoso, es relevante destacar que en enero recién pasado y luego de una rápida y consensuada tramitación en el Congreso Nacional, Chile ratificó ante la OIT el protocolo 29 del año 2014 relativo al convenio sobre trabajo forzoso. Lo anterior implica no solo nuevos e importantes desafíos, sino que principalmente un reto en su implementación. Así es como actualmente estamos trabajando en la elaboración de un plan de acción nacional para la eliminación del trabajo forzoso, cuyo objetivo es poder cumplir dicha meta lo antes posible. De más está decir que esta pandemia nos ha impactado profundamente en distintos aspectos de nuestra vida y al mismo tiempo nos ha impuesto nuevos desafíos. Es un hecho cierto que el COVID-19 repercutirá en el cumplimiento de la meta de la Agenda 2030 y especialmente en su objetivo 8.7, ya que consecuencias como la pérdida de empleos, la disminución de ingresos familiares y el cierre de escuelas y colegios podría generar un aumento del trabajo infantil. Es nuestra labor hacer que esos efectos se mitiguen al máximo. Sin duda, aún nos falta mucho camino por avanzar, pero creemos que vamos en el camino correcto. Es aquí donde el multilateralismo cobra un rol primordial y la contribución de la cooperación internacional resulta muy relevante. El rol de organizaciones como la OIT, quienes han sido activos promotores de la recopilación y sistematización de la experiencia comparada, resulta fundamental, pues permite luego compartirlas con sus miembros y desarrollar importantes instancias de difusión de estas mejores prácticas como la que hoy nos convoca. Finalmente, terminar reiterando el compromiso irrestricto de Chile con el objetivo de erradicar el trabajo infantil, el trabajo forzoso y la trata de personas, a fin de que podamos avanzar de manera integrada en la meta 8.7 y principalmente dar fiel y cabal cumplimiento a nuestro país, a nuestro deber como país pionero de dicha alianza. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Minister. And next, His Excellency, Mr. Albert Nicola, Deputy Minister of Health and Social Protection in Albania. Your Excellency, if you could tell us about Albania's efforts to reach target 8.7.
Thank you, Ms. Shrina. Thank you to all of you and the warm greeting from Albania. I'm really sorry because I had to move to a new device due to technical problems. Just to mention to all of you that the problem of the exploitation of children and the labor children was really a problem that we had to face even during communist time, but in that time it was a hidden problem. So we had to face this dramatically when after the collapse of communism in the country. So I have to mention a very important fact that Albania has embraced the global partnership designed to make a strong contribution to the achievement of 2030 agenda on child labor, and is fully committed to its implementation in the context of European integration process. In this perspective, in 2019, Albania became part of Alliance 8.7 as pathfinder country, showing its commitment to eliminate forced child labor and child trafficking by 2025. Assessing the urgency of action, the Ministry of Health and Social Protection, in cooperation with ILO and UNICEF presence in Albania, coordinated meetings and consultations with various institutional actors, relevant ministries, civil society, academics, and other stakeholders to identify national priorities to protect children from economic exploitation. As a result, it's very important to mention this, the National Action Plan for the Protection of Children from Economic Exploitation, including Children in Street Situation 2019-2021, was adopted and reflects the commitment of state and non-state institutions to prevent, identify, and provide protection for every child who is at risk or in a situation of economic exploitation. The purpose of National Action Plan is that to guarantee the rights and protections of economically exploited children, including children in street situation, through the prevention, establishment of services, and strengthening the implementation of legislation by ensuring the protection of children victims of economic exploitation. I think it's very important to mention the fact of the street children, because this phenomenon is quite diffused in Albania, especially among the Roman community. That's why we have focused the attention to this phenomenon in coordination with the exploitation of children as well. So the National Agenda on the Rights of the Child is the strategic document which expresses the priorities of Albanian government for realization of all child rights, as well as unified framework for monitoring the progress toward the realization of child rights in every sector. Since 2017, Albania has a new law on the rights and protection of the child that provides child protection from economic exploitation. Minimum working age in Albania is 16 years old, but it's important to mention that the child can perform light work which does not harm his health, development, or hinders his child attending the school. According to the dispositions of the Labor Code, the child is protected from economic exploitation, as well as from carrying out any forced work within his family, at school, rehabilitation, and sentencing institutions, or in cultural, artistic, sporting, modeling, or advertising activities, which presents danger, deprives the education, harm his physical, mental, spiritual, moral, or social health or development. Significant legal changes have been undertaken to promote interinstitutional cooperation at the local level and to establish clear procedures for identification, immediate assistance, and referral of economically exploited children in the formal and informal sector, including children in street situation. The State Labor Inspectorate has been essential in advising businesses and monitoring their compliance with Labor Code. Local action plans have been drafted with the support of UNICEF and UN agencies to holistically address the issue of child labor and their protection from economic exploitation in largest municipalities of the country. These local social plans contain concrete objectives and measures in managing cases of children identified in economic exploitation situations. Awareness campaign as well as identification and the provision of service targeting the most vulnerable families and kids are worth mentioning here, such as registration of unregistered children, vaccination, especially in this pandemic situation, school registration, access to medical services, parental employment, psychological and counseling and support. Currently, Albania is working on the strategic vision for the next 4 years, and one of the main pillars of the new strategy will be protection of children from hazardous labor and trafficking. Concrete objectives will be defined there in line with Alliance 8.7 goals. A better systemic coordination of all stakeholders and actors at central and local levels is needed to maximize the impact of our collective efforts in finding the effective path to zero child labor. And the Ministry of Health and Social Services in Albania is fully committed to lead this process. So thank you. And last, I would like to mention the fact that if we protect the dignity of the human beings from the moment they are born till the natural death, this is really connected to the protection of the children in every step of their child. So thank you very much for this incredible and important attention that you have focused on. So thank you very much again, and wishing good proceedings to this very important event.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for all your words and those commitments, and good luck with all the challenges that you've outlined. Next, we have a video message from Her Excellency Dr. Maria Flaxbart, Deputy Minister and Parliamentary State Secretary to the Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany.
Esteemed representatives of the United Nations and the European Union, fellow colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, every child who is being exploited through child labor somewhere in the world is a child too many. And because of COVID-19, their number is growing even further. Rising poverty, shrinking family incomes, and extensive school closures are forcing even more children into exploitative labor. The only way we can change that is through joint efforts. It is up to us to use the 2021 International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour in order to secure the process already made and speed up the process. We must invest in the young generation, and by doing that, bring about development that is inclusive, equitable, and sustainable. Young people have considerable untapped potential. The 2030 Agenda explicitly calls them crucial agents of change. Germany joined the Alliance 8.7 in 2017. High expectations have been directed toward us, not just this year. In the Alliance, we have become actively involved in the working group on supply chains in particular. We want to assume even greater multilateral responsibility and are therefore applying for Pathfinder status. That means we are making a commitment to cooperate even more with other countries and to put a stronger focus on the 8.7 goal in our national policy agenda. The aim is to elaborate a strategy that sets out national priorities and responsibilities. Guided by this roadmap, which is to be drafted this autumn in a Pathfinder workshop, Germany intends to significantly increase its commitment in the context of the global fight against child labor and forced labor. At the national level, the German Parliament is about to adopt a law for applying human rights due diligence in supply chains today. The law will explicitly include a ban on child labor. Germany has been campaigning for an end to exploitative child labor for decades. Our focus here is also on tackling the roots of the problem. In order to reduce global poverty, our efforts are directed toward promoting sustainable ways of doing business and supporting the further development of education systems. We carry out this work together with affected countries and international partners. To give you an example, for many years now, we have been providing funding for the ILO's international program on the elimination of child labor, which the German government helped to initiate and which has received more than 70 million US dollars from Germany. This is a program for reducing poverty and for strengthening education, social protection, and human rights. Germany will continue to pursue this approach, which is aimed at tackling the deeper causes of child labor. It is true that there is still a lot of hard work ahead of us until exploitative child labor becomes a thing of past. However, I am equally convinced that by joining forces, we will achieve our goal, so that every child is able to live a life of dignity and respect. Thank you.
And finally, for this segment, we have the UN Special Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons, especially in women and children, Ms. Siobhan Mulally. And perhaps, Mulally, you can tell us something about this connection that we've been hearing a lot in the last hour and a half. Almost everyone's mentioned this link between trafficking and child labor. What is this connection about?
Thank you very much, Excellencies, colleagues, children and young people. Thank you for the opportunity to speak at today's important event marking the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour. And in particular, thank you to the organisers, to Luxembourg, to the European Union, to the ILO and to UNICEF. And I would like to particularly thank my co-panellist, Ms. Molly Namim Rembe, who shared her lived experience and her expertise on the urgent steps needed and the impact of our failings to ensure protection of child rights and best interests of the child. And I think it's important to note that in the context of child trafficking, the international legal definition of trafficking in persons has three components that we talk about: act, means and purpose. And in identifying victims of trafficking, a key thing is the question of consent with regard to the situation in which a person is found. But with regard to children, of course, there can be no question of consent. The issue of consent is irrelevant, and also the means. So you look at the act, which may be recruitment or harboring, it could be abduction, and the exploitation, the purpose. And the presence of those means that that is a situation of trafficking, and questions around consent as such don't arise in the context of children. So that, I think, is critical to remember in the context of this discussion. And as many speakers have already noted, today we're speaking against the background of COVID-19 and the very serious risk of increases globally in extreme poverty, and with that of child trafficking, with the collapse of informal economies in many parts of the world, and then the heightened risks that are faced by children whose families are experiencing poverty and increasing poverty because of state policies and choices, and because of the failings of international cooperation between states and limited action by the business sector. My specific mandate on trafficking in persons, especially women and children, has this child rights focus, and it includes all forms of trafficking, including in particular trafficking for the purpose of labour exploitation. And it also has a very specific and important gender dimension that recognises that exploitation may be multifaceted. Labour exploitation, and specifically child labour, is often combined with sexual exploitation, for example, in domestic work, in agriculture, in brick kilns, in remote settings, where there is limited oversight and monitoring and very serious risks of abuse. And both boys and girls are at risk of these intersecting and multiple forms of exploitation. And we need to recognize the gender dimensions and the heightened risks that are faced by children of multiple forms of exploitation. We know in particular that children in minority communities or refugee or migrant or internally displaced children, particularly in conflict settings, who are marginalized and excluded from general protection systems, are at particular risk of trafficking. And these risks may be linked to the exclusion of their families from social protection systems, from their exclusion from child protection systems, or from their families' access to decent work. Children with disabilities may also be at heightened risk, and children in institutional settings or separated from families or guardians may be targeted for exploitation. And the international legal framework prohibiting trafficking in persons applies without discrimination. Non-discrimination is a core norm, but we know that children who are migrants or refugees or children in minority communities are often not given the same levels of protection or not identified as at risk of trafficking and not referred to the ordinary protection systems. And at this moment in time and in this year, we also need to look at the role of states, to look at regional initiatives such as currently within the European Union, to more strictly enforce and enhance human rights standards in supply chains, and particularly child rights. And we need to look at ensuring better enforcement of the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, as has been mentioned already. Every company has the responsibility to prevent risks of human rights violations, and not only to act when it is practically too late. In addition, we need to ensure that the entire supply chain, the entire value chain must be covered, from the extractions of raw materials to the use of products. And gaps or compromises that we see in laws that are being adopted and policies need to be addressed now. We can no longer continue with these kinds of gaps, with these kinds of compromises. And here I would like to highlight the important work of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, its general obligation number 16 on states' obligations regarding the impact of the business sector on children's rights, and the repeated urgency and urgent recommendations of the Committee on the Rights of the Child to require businesses to undertake child rights due diligence measures, to ensure that business enterprises identify, prevent, and take effective action to address their impact on children's rights across their business relationships and within global operations. And this requires effective actions to end child labour. And as part of this child rights due diligence, business enterprises must be required to make public their efforts to address child rights impacts, to publish the actions that they are taking to ensure that the goods and services they produce or commercialize do not involve violations of children's rights. As my recent report to the UN General Assembly highlighted, unfortunately, we have seen that voluntary measures have limited impact. We need to move to mandatory reporting systems, not just on the steps taken, but on their impact and outcomes, and on the remedies that are being provided to children where violations have occurred. States have obligations to engage in international cooperation. This is provided for under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, under the Committee on the Rights of the Child General Comment number 16, and to cooperate internationally for the realization of children's rights beyond their territorial boundaries. The preamble and the provisions of the Convention consistently refer to the importance of international cooperation. We also know that children often find it difficult to access the justice system, to seek effective remedies for abuse or violations of their rights when business enterprises are involved. Children may lack legal standing, which prevents them from pursuing a claim. Children and their families often lack knowledge about the rights and how to effectively enforce them. And the mechanisms and procedures available to them to seek redress, there may be many obstacles, many procedural hurdles, limits in access to legal aid. And states do not always investigate breaches of criminal, civil, or administrative laws committed by business enterprises. We know that there are vast power imbalances that limit those kinds of investigations and effective actions on the ground. There are vast power imbalances, of course, between children and business enterprises, and often many hurdles, as I said, in the way of seeking effective remedies. But these are positive obligations on states, and those include positive obligations, as I said, of international cooperation. We also need to look at where states do not already have provisions in place for collective complaints, such as class actions or public interest litigation. These are ways of removing the obstacles to effective action, and they should be introduced as a means of increasing accessibility to justice for large numbers of children who may be similarly affected by the negative impacts of business actions. We need to ensure that there are effective child protection systems for all children, and resourcing of child protection is critical to ending child labour and to combating child trafficking. Ensuring decent work and social security for all without discrimination must be ensured so that families are not at risk of exploitation and children within families and communities are not at such risk. And we need to ensure that the measures taken to combat child labour are context specific, that they take into account the specific local context and put in place measures to support children's education, child protection, and future transitions to work. And critically important, we need to ensure that those who are most affected, children and their families, survivors, that they take a leading role in designing the responses and measures to end child labour. And finally, I would just like to note that my upcoming report to the UN General Assembly in October will include a specific focus on the recruitment of children into armed conflict, including by groups engaged in terrorist activities. It will highlight the particular risks arising in the context of COVID-19, including the role of the digital environment in recruitment. And here again, I would highlight the very recent new general comment from the Committee on the Rights of the Child on child rights in the digital environment. And we need to recognize here what happens in the digital environment, the risks in recruitment, in online grooming, and the need to ensure that children who are recruited into armed conflict settings are recognized as victims of trafficking and protected as such. Achieving SDG target 8.7 requires concerted action now by states, by businesses, and the international community. And through my mandate, I will do everything I can to support this ongoing work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Malari, for that strong intervention, both inserting context for us, but also the very specific recommendations that you have given today to member states, to the private sector, business. I hope everyone is listening and taking note, and we look forward to your next report. Now we move to statements from member states, and I'd just like to remind all speakers to please keep their remarks to 2 minutes per delegation. And we will start with the Honourable Minister Ivaris Bortolo, Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of Malta.
Thank you. Child labour is an issue that has troubled the international community for years. It is a tragedy that, according to a new report published by the ILO and UNICEF, for the first time in 2 decades, the number of children being put to work has risen to 160 million worldwide. Children have the right to be children, to spend their childhood exploring the world, learning, growing, and playing. They should be ensured safety, security, and well-being. They have the right to education. Children need to be given the tools to shape their futures. We cannot rob them of this opportunity by subjecting them to labor at such a tender age. And COVID-19 has made life much more difficult for 1 billion children, a staggering 1 billion children, whose education has been disrupted with closed schools and inadequate access to online learning, if at all available. We thank the organizers of this high-level event for convening us here today to discuss such an issue of major concern. The pandemic has intensified the threats of poverty and child labor, as the equivalence of 255 million full-time jobs have been lost. During this international year for the elimination of child labor, especially, Malta joins the international community in calling for further action to be taken to eliminate child labor by 2025. We need to continue working together for child labor to no longer be a topic for discussion at all levels, but a concerning phenomenon of the past. In order to achieve our goal, we need to address the root causes that lead to child labor. Let us work to be preventive rather than reactive. Finally, I call upon us all consumers to make more ethical purchases as individuals to discourage child labor worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you. Her Excellency, Ms. Doris Zapata, Minister of Labour and Labour Development. Ms. Zapata, go ahead.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Reciban un cordial saludo del Gobierno de la República de Panamá. Nuestro país sostiene avances importantes en materia de trabajo infantil, generando escenarios positivos que brindan bienestar a nuestra población más vulnerable. Reconocemos falta por hacer para seguir avanzando y ratificamos nuestro compromiso con el cumplimiento de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible, específicamente la meta 8.7 para erradicar el trabajo infantil en toda su forma. La última encuesta realizada en Panamá detectó 23.855 niños, niñas y adolescentes en situación de trabajo infantil. De estos, 5.300 han recibido una beca que aseguró su permanencia en el sistema educativo. En el año 2018, la OIT presentó el estudio mixto sobre el trabajo infantil en la industria de la caña de azúcar, declaró a Panamá libre de mano de obra infantil. En la región compartimos experiencias, procesos y aplicamos las medidas para poder compartir nuestra experiencia. El Ministerio de Trabajo de Panamá realizó una encuesta respecto a cómo el COVID-19 ha afectado a algunas familias, dirigida a los beneficiarios del Programa de Acción Directa Gubernamental para prevenir y erradicar el trabajo infantil. Detectamos que el 94% de los niños y niñas no realizaban ningún tipo de trabajo y el 88% de las familias han sido beneficiadas de algún programa de transferencia económica condicionada del Gobierno Nacional. Panamá ha ejecutado acciones para erradicar el trabajo infantil con el compromiso de disminuir la pobreza y la desigualdad, realizando alianzas con organismos internacionales, organizaciones no gubernamentales, sector privado y grupos sindicales. Como país desarrollamos estrategias desde el Comité para la Erradicación del Trabajo Infantil y Protección de la Persona Adolescente Trabajadora, conformado de forma tripartita y focalizada en recorridos de prevención y protección, distritos libres de trabajo infantil, centros comunitarios integral y alianzas público-privadas que nos garantizan poder avanzar. El presidente de la República, Laurentino Cortizo Cohen, desde el Gabinete Social, dirige un programa de acción directa gubernamental para prevenir y erradicar el trabajo infantil. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Next, a video message from Her Excellency Ms. Anne Lind, Foreign Minister of Sweden.
Millions of children are exploited in working life each year, affecting their right to education and threatening their safety and health. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused both increased child labor and decreased access to education. Missing out on education has devastating impacts on children's ability to exercise their rights and further opportunities later in life. We must therefore, among other things, prioritize comprehensive social protection, the promotion of decent work for adults, and, not the least, measures to get children back into school. Sweden aims to be a strong voice and advocate for human rights in the world of work globally. Our foreign policy initiative, Drive for Democracy, actively aims to involve young persons and puts priority to highlight the need to abolish all forms of forced labor and child labor. We encourage states to comply with the ILO Convention on the worst forms of child labor. The Convention's universal ratification last year was a major achievement. We also urge states to ratify the ILO's Minimum Age Convention. Of key importance, of course, is also the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which recognizes the child's right to protection against work that may be harmful and negatively affect the child's education. I'm proud that the convention was incorporated into Swedish legislation last year. The work of guaranteeing the rights of the child is more important than ever. The International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour comes at the right time. We must continue to act. It is a task for all of us.
Ms. Jennifer Townsend, UK Envoy for Modern Slavery.
Excellences, ladies and gentlemen, chers collègues, thank you very much to the permanent representation of Luxembourg, to the EU, UNICEF and the ILO for convening this important event today. The commitments that set out in the call to action launched at the UN General Assembly in 2017 and now endorsed by more than 90 countries remain ever more relevant as we convene today to mark the 2021 UN International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour and as the new global estimates on child labour are published. As we look ahead to the next global conference on child labour in South Africa in 2022, the UK commits to work in partnership with UK business to identify and address modern slavery risks in their operations and supply chains. We've committed to take forward an ambitious package of changes in due course to strengthen the UK Modern Slavery Act, which we put into our legal framework in 2015. These include extending the reporting requirement to public bodies with a budget of £36 million or more, mandating the specific reporting topics that modern slavery statements must cover, requiring organisations to publish their modern slavery statements on a new government digital reporting service to increase transparency, setting a single reporting deadline by which all modern slavery statements must be published, and introducing financial penalties for organisations who fail to meet their statutory obligations to publish transparent modern slavery statements under the Modern Slavery Act of 2015. The UK also commits to continue to work in partnership with government partners, including Alliance 8.7, to strengthen donor coordination efforts and support social protection and other measures which mitigate against an increase in child labour and forced labour due to the impact of COVID-19. And the UK also commits to deliver our new strategy tackling child sexual abuse, published in January 2021, by working internationally to strengthen the global response. This includes driving common global standards, collaborating with international partners to help strengthen protections for children in key at-risk countries and combating transnational child sex offenders. In addition, we will also review the UK government's current modern slavery strategy, including public engagement processes to assess our current progress and on our international and domestic response to tackle modern slavery, human trafficking and child labour. And finally, the UK will continue to be an active and engaged partner with international bilateral partners and multilateral organisations to support regional and national responses and share best practice on what works to tackle the worst forms of child labour in countries of high prevalence. Many thanks.
Thank you. His Excellency, Mr. Tetsuya Kimura, the Permanent Representative of Japan.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Excellencies, distinguished participants. I thank Luxembourg and EU, the co-sponsors, for convening this important event. Japan echoes the call for member states and other stakeholders to recommit to ending all forms of child labor in this International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. COVID-19 has posed an aggravating impact on children under already fragile situations. Japan is alarmed by the lost opportunity for education and increased risk of child labor. The international community must step up its efforts to minimize the impact of the pandemic on vulnerable children. Japan has been leading efforts on this issue. The G20 committed to eradicate child labor in the G20 Osaka Leaders Declaration and the G20 Labor and Employment Minister Declaration during our presidency. We are also actively engaged in supporting the efforts in Asian countries. For example, Japan and the International Labour Organization, ILO, have partnered to implement a project in the agricultural communities in Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, the Philippines. These projects aim to help the local government of the region effectively tackle child labor by involving stakeholders and civil society, with a view to improving and increasing non-formal education and access to skills training, providing economic empowerment opportunities, and improving policy responses through regulatory framework and institutional development. Japan is determined to make every effort to protect and promote children's rights from the perspective of human security, and looks forward to working closely with the United Nations and civil society in this endeavor. I thank you.
Thank you. And now His Excellency, Mr. Raitis Paulaskas, the permanent representative of Lithuania.
Sincerely, thank you. Our colleagues of Luxembourg, EU, UNICEF, and ILO for organizing this important event. The COVID-19 outbreak affected all segments of population and was particularly detrimental to those social groups in the most vulnerable situations, including children. COVID-19 resulted in the rise of poverty and, among many other negative impacts, reduced opportunities in the labor market for the parents, thus making children much more vulnerable to child labor. Child labor not only limits access to education, but also harms child's physical, mental, and social growth, leading to intergenerational cycles of poverty and child labor. Especially for girls, the triple burden of school, work, and household chores heightens their risk of falling behind, making them even more vulnerable to poverty and exclusion. On this occasion, I would like to thank ILO and UNICEF for their comprehensive joint report on child labor and for this wake-up call, as for the very first time in 2 decades, we witnessed the increase of number of children in labor. Worldwide, 160 million children, an increase of 8.4 million over 4 years, are engaged in child labor, and COVID-19 was one of the main factors contributing to these grim numbers. As the report shows, we are far and getting even further from eliminating the child labor. Therefore, we need to mobilize ourselves in addressing and in eliminating the root causes of the child labor. Lithuania is strongly committed to the protection of children, and we are ready to act on both national and international level, including cooperating with all relevant actors in reversing the negative trend. As the current president of UNICEF Executive Board, I had an opportunity to get a better perspective on the importance of the UNICEF's role and its efficiency and capacity to strengthen the protection of children on the ground. And I'm very grateful for the organization for what they are doing in engaging and mobilizing the global community, public and private sectors, to eliminate the child labor. The new UNICEF strategic plan for 2022 and 2025 is expected to be adopted in September. And it is commendable that under the goal area 3, UNICEF will be shifting towards a greater focus on preventing violence and harmful practices, including by better understanding children's particular intersecting vulnerabilities, including social and behavioral patterns that contribute to violation of children's rights. The outcome focus is crucial to catalyze a systemic change and strengthen protective environment for the children. We have to reinforce our efforts in our national capacity to ensure and create decent work for adults and to enact comprehensive social protection measures, provide safe, accessible, and high-quality inclusive education. I sincerely thank you.
Thank you. And now the distinguished representative from Liechtenstein, Georg Sparber.
Thank you very much, Shireen, for giving me the floor, and many thanks to Luxembourg, the EU, the ILO, and UNICEF for organizing this meaningful event. Target 8.7 of the 2030 agenda calls for concrete action to eradicate forced labor and modern slavery and human trafficking, as well as the worst forms of child labor. More than 40 million people around the world are victims of modern slavery, and the ILO estimates that about 160 million children are subject to child labor, many of them working in slavery or slavery-like conditions. Therefore, the fight against modern slavery and child labor are intertwined. COVID-19 has amplified the drivers of modern slavery and child labor, including growing poverty and economic inequality. Women and girls, already disproportionately affected by modern slavery, will find themselves even more vulnerable as a result of the pandemic, as many are forced to drop out of school early, are sent to work in exploitative conditions, or are married off against their will. The widespread school closures in response to the pandemic render children, in particular school-age girls, even more susceptible to exploitation. The pandemic is therefore a call on all of us. Part of building back better should certainly include an active effort to leverage the crucial role played by the financial sector in ending exploitative practices. This is why, together with Australia, the Netherlands, the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, and UN University, Liechtenstein launched the Finance Against Slavery and Trafficking Initiative, or FAST in short. FAST aims to engage the financial sector to tackle trafficking and slavery. It offers financial actors a practical blueprint to promote sustainable and innovative financing, responsible lending and investment, and compliance and regulation. We invite all of you to approach us if you would like to join forces on the FAST initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope everyone heard your invitation. Now, the distinguished representative from Thailand, Supark Prongthura.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, for giving me the floor. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to join this important event to reflect on our progress and challenges that remain in order to accelerate our action as we mark the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour. As a party to the ILO Convention 182 since 2001, Thailand has placed great importance to eliminating child labour in all forms. We address child labour through a holistic approach, viewing the issue in conjunction with other challenges, including human trafficking and labour migration. Efforts have also been made to prevent our children from falling victims to sexual abuses and labour exploitation by improving legal frameworks and due diligence and strengthening law enforcement. Our authorities have been conducting intensive and consistent labour inspection, especially in high-risk sectors such as the garment industry and seafoods. We have also made significant progress in ensuring that all children in Thailand, regardless of their nationality, have access to 15-year basic education for free. Without proper schooling, the concerns that migrant children who accompany their parents may be at risk and easily drawn to child labor and fall victims to other forms of abuses. Through the lens of socio-economic development, Thailand also focuses on empowering children and their families, especially those at risk of being marginalized. This approach to prevent child labor has also become more vital as we simultaneously fight against the negative impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our children. Having said that, we also realize that more can be done to make sure that our children live the lives they deserve. The Royal Thai government is therefore determined to engage with all stakeholders, including civil society, the private sector, media, and youth, in order to promote and protect the rights of our children and empower them to mold their futures by their own hands. With our strong commitment and action, we will together end child labor, contribute towards achieving the SDGs, and build a better world for the present and the next generations. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you. Mr. Mark Zellenrath, Distinguished Representative from the Netherlands.
Thank you very much, Shireen. And I'll be brief, as I think that Mr. Schmidt said it best at the beginning of this meeting, and that is that we're on the verge of losing 20 years of progress. We've added millions of more children that are being forced into labor instead of going towards that goal of zero child labor in 2025. And I think the intervention by Molly showed us best what that is, what that means emotionally, what scars it leaves behind for the children that are exposed to it, and the knock-on effects on society and why it is so important to step up. And when it comes to my country, to the Netherlands, stepping up means doing more in addition to the 40 million euros that we already spend on combating child labor. And we've done two things for this international year. First of all, we have become a Pathfinder country under 8.7 with the Alliance, working even more closely with high and low income countries to eliminate child labor. And secondly, we have adopted a new action pledge, which is called Let's Work Together to End Child Labor Anywhere by Anyone, period. And that is not just a pledge by my government, it's a pledge we have made together with our social partners, which are our business associations, labor unions, and NGOs. And there are three focus areas on which we pay particular attention. First of all, to stimulate and inspire businesses to do more, for instance, provide financial support to companies that do eliminate child labor from their supply chains. Secondly, to be able to share those experiences and give a platform to front-runner countries, for instance, through a community app that we have launched. And thirdly, that we link and address the root causes of child labor, which means access to education, paying living wages, and improving quality of life, which are all needed to get to zero child labor in 2025. So thank you very much for giving me the floor. And let me end by quoting Mr. Kailesh, who's always such an inspiring speaker. Let's leave no child behind, especially in this year. Thank you, Shireen.
Indeed, thank you so much. And now to the distinguished representative from Italy, Simona Di Martini.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank Luxembourg, the EU, ILO, and UNICEF for organizing this timely high-level event. Sadly, as we speak, the latest report by the ILO and UNICEF shows that progress to end child labor has stalled for the first time in 20 years, also as a result of the pandemic. We need to act immediately to recover the lost ground. A radical paradigm shift is ever more needed. Italy is among the 9 founding members of ILO and among the first signatories of Convention 182, now universally ratified. However, no convention is effective in itself without a wide, strong commitment on the part of governments, employers, civil society organizations, the media, and the education system to implement it. Italy is fully committed to eradicating child labor, also by combating extreme poverty. The Italian government established an inclusion fund for families with minor children, also with a view to contribute to the reduction of child labor. We're committed to promoting awareness-raising initiatives for the elimination of the worst forms of child and forced labor and trafficking in person by 2025, including through activities in the areas of education, arts, and music. Within the long-standing cooperation with ILO, Italy has supported a world campaign for the elimination of child labor in 2018. We have been implementing technical cooperation programs to assist countries where the phenomenon is most present. We are strongly engaged in fighting social dumping, also through the implementation of ethical codes of conduct and social clauses, and through the promotion of international fair trade. Our parliament passed specific legislative measures aimed at protecting the unaccompanied foreign minors. We are active in the implementation of the Children and Armed Conflicts agenda in combating child sexual exploitation and abuse and trafficking. We are aware that more needs to be done to reverse this trend. Italy stands ready as we mark this important year to continue and ever increase the engagement to end this scourge. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we go to His Excellency, Mr. Philippe Kridelka, the Permanent Representative of Belgium.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. Let me first of all also thank the organizers, Luxembourg, EU, ILO, and UNICEF for this important event. On the occasion of the International Day of the Elimination of Child Labour tomorrow, Belgium reaffirms its strong engagement in the fight against child labour. The promotion and defense of children's rights is a priority for Belgium. Our policies and actions are based on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and the EU guidelines, aiming at leaving no child behind. All our governments have a responsibility to translate conventions into our own legislations and enforce it. Action is what is needed. Our federal government has adopted a national action plan for the private sector and human rights, with a particular attention to children's rights. A specific example is the Beyond Chocolate partnership with many of our most important chocolate producers, aiming at prevention and elimination of child labor throughout the supply chain, together with cacao producing countries like, for example, Ivory Coast. For many years now, Belgium is proud to co-chair the group of Friends of Decent Work here in New York. In 2021, the focus of this group of friends is, of course, on the social economic response on the COVID-19 impact and on this International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour. We are very pleased to collaborate intensely with the group of Friends on Children and the SDGs on this International Year, and always in full partnership, of course, with ILO, UNICEF, and others. Belgium does fund several multilateral organizations that are actively involved in the fight against child labour, in particular ILO and UNICEF. We also have an additional budget of 50 million euros now that has been earmarked for a program on social protection and decent work in the Central African region, with a focus also there on child labour. Finally, our government funds a large number of Belgian NGOs and trade unions that work in full partnership with their international networks and local counterparts in the South, promoting decent work, labour rights, the ILO conventions, and the rights of the child. Often child labour is one of the most important areas. These programs and projects go from the clothing industry in Southeast Asia, over artisanal mining in Africa, to the maquiladoras and maquilas in Latin America. Not less than 92 million euros was allocated to the work of these NGOs and trade unions over the last 5 years, and the same will be committed for the coming 5 years. Policies and actions, local and global, are what we need to eliminate child labour. I encourage all of us to be bold and to come up with suggestions on how to move this agenda forward at the United Nations, at the 5th Global Conference on Child Labour in South Africa next year, and beyond. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, we've almost reached the end of this high-level event. We'll now hear closing remarks by the permanent representative of Luxembourg, directly followed by the head of delegation of the EU to the UN. Ambassadors, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Excellencies, colleagues. Today's high-level event has made one thing very clear. This year, the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour, is critical for global efforts against child labour. The new estimates, we have heard them all, as they have been commented, released yesterday, have rung an alarm bell. While the full impact of COVID-19 on child labour will only be known in the years to come, millions more may be pushed into child labour as families and children are reeling from the economic and social consequences that the pandemic has brought on. It is clear that for the time being, the continued fight against COVID-19 has effectively become intertwined with protecting the right of every child. If we are to achieve target 8.67 and put an end to all forms of child labour within the next 4 years, we have to work together across generations, across sectors, and across countries. The COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us of the importance of solidarity in tackling global challenges. The fight against child labour is no different. Today we have had an opportunity to listen to very insightful proposals in order to tackle child labour in a sustainable way. We certainly will have to follow up on them. And I hope today's meeting will serve also this purpose. As Perm Rep of Luxembourg, but also in my capacity as co-chair of the Group of Friends of Children and the SDGs, I would like to thank very much the EU, the ILO, and UNICEF for having co-organized this high-level meeting. I would also like to thank all of you for having joined us today to mark the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour, and for having shown your resolve to end child labour by working together in solidarity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shireen, for guiding us through today. And I really want to thank everyone who has shown such commitment and leadership and helping us to highlight this horrific situation at today's meeting. It's much appreciated. I think we all agree that it is an absolute insult to our humanity, to our compassion, to our enlightened self-interest, and also to our human capacity that this violation against the rights of every child is being violated by the millions every day. I think it's been encouraging, though, to hear that there's a host of ideas and proposals and actions are being taken. We have had strategies explained, domestic legislation explained to us, good practices shared. And it's encouraging to see so many world leaders and also international organizations being committed and on the task, so to speak. It's clear from what we've heard that being a bystander, expressing our indignation is not enough. And it's also clear that we cannot leave it to the individual children or to the parents of those children who are just trying to strive to survive from one day to another to take charge of resolving this situation. So goal 8.7 cannot be seen in isolation. I think that's another lesson from today. It's related to education, to providing health services and other services, to global supply chains and systems, to consumer awareness, to due diligence of business, implementation of global norms, and not least the full implementation on the Convention of the Rights of the Child. Tying domestic legislation and regional strategies, such as the EU strategy that we've heard about today, into global norms and multilateral cooperation seems to be the only way forward. So let's continue to share good practices and to step up our joint action. Thank you again, everyone, for your great contribution today and for the co-organizers. I hope everyone has a good day. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Your Excellencies, and I completely agree with Ambassador Skog. This has been a very rich and important event. I've heard countries make pledges and even announce changes in law in the last couple of hours. It shows that there is will here for change. So thank you especially to the organizers and all those who have been working in the background behind the scenes to make this happen, and also for inviting Amnesty to moderate this very important event. We're going to close out by playing one of the winning songs of the Music Against Child Labour competition, which comes from Peru. This competition was organized by the ILO and JM International, thanks to the support of the Clear Cotton Project. The ILO's Clear Cotton Project is co-funded by the European Union and implemented in collaboration with FAO. Enjoy, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.